if you want to grow a business sustainably, you've got to put a marker in the sand. Now, life happens and things might change, or there might be external factors that change and you might need to course correct along the way. But if you're just aimlessly moving forward, and what's the famous Yogi Berra quote around, if you don't know where you're going, any road will get you there?
Welcome to the Growth Trust podcast. Today's session marks the exciting launch of a new podcast series focusing the microscope on issues and challenges facing many small and medium business enterprises that play such an important role in the Australian economy. In fact, the latest figures show small businesses contributed more than $500 billion to the local economy, equivalent to a third of the nation's GDP. This Growth Trust podcast is brought to you by the Australian Centre for Business Growth, which was established by the University of South Australia almost a decade ago. Over that time, the Centre's delivered world-class business growth programs, providing business owners, CEOs, managing directors and their executive team members with the knowledge and skills needed to grow their companies. Today, we'll be discussing the Centre's role with its director, Ryan Williams, and we'll also be discussing its impact with someone who's felt it firsthand, growth expert Alison Taylor. She has started, grown and sold her co-founded company, PUMPSEAL Australia, and is joining us via Zoom. Well, firstly, to you, Ryan Williams, an exciting opening, our first podcast. Tell us about your business experience and how you came to emigrate from South Africa to take up this key appointment with the Centre.
We'd made the decision to move out to Australia 2017, I think. I'd been doing business here on and off for a period of time before that, and chose to come to Adelaide because we love everything the city's got to offer. A tremendous amount of experience that's all sort of within a 10, 15, 20-minute radius. When we arrived here, I was still doing some consulting work for a few international firms and was having a think about what it would be that I'd like to be doing going forward and working that out. Having come out of an environment where I worked a lot with private equity firms, I'd made some phone calls to friends in Australia to say, give me a lay of the land, and got an introduction to Jerry Corson at Kane Lawyers. And Jerry and I went for a cup of coffee and he said, while you're busy working out what you want to do, there's this centre at the uni that helps SMEs work out how to grow and scale. And with your kind of experience, that'd be probably something that you'd enjoy doing for a couple of days a month or whatever. Anyway, so I ideally went for a cup of coffee with Jana Matthews, who founded the centre, and what's supposed to be half an hour turned into 2 hours, and finding somebody that speaks the same sort of language, and where we had so many, I guess, shared experiences and perspectives and values alignment. That translated into a phone call a bit later on to say, look, would you like to come and run this thing? And never having worked in an academic environment before, I thought that'd be a nice fresh challenge and a whole bunch of interesting learning. So yeah, that's kind of how I got there.
Are there peculiar differences between running a business here and in South Africa? Are there fundamentals that, apply to any business across the globe?
I think at the core of it, all businesses fundamentally run the same way. I know we like to believe, and I've worked across a very diverse range of companies, from software businesses, cinema chains, radio stations, signage businesses, manufacturing. And I think we like to believe that what we do is unique. But at the heart of it, everything has a product or service. Everything has a customer. Everything has a way to monetize that for the benefit of stakeholders. Even if you're thinking about a not-for-profit. Because a not-for-profit has to run sustainably, so you are generating commercial returns that keeps the thing afloat and delivers value back to the stakeholders, in that case, the beneficiaries of the NFP. So I think at its core, all businesses run on the same underlying engine. It's just perhaps the shading and the scale that changes, and the nature of the customers and the production function and those sorts of things are different.
So you talked about the role of the Centre in helping to grow businesses. What are the fundamental aims of the Centre long term? It's been established almost a decade now.
Yep.
Where do you want to take it in the future, and what role will it play with SMEs into the future?
Our mission statement really is, we think that every CEO that would like to grow their business has the right to learn how to do so. The analogy we would use is, millions of people around the world are born not knowing how to drive a car, but they learn. And I think, and certainly this is true from my own experience, and many of the other CEOs, particularly in the SME landscape that I meet, there isn't the education and kind of large corporate grooming that sort of prepares somebody for those roles and sees them take on different leadership functions. In SMEs, there oftentimes isn't that level of scale to be able to do so. And you end up with leaders who are kind of learning on the job. So we do think that there is a deficit in, probably for many companies, the leaders of those organizations having all the tools and knowledge at their disposal. So our purpose is really to try and help disseminate that information. These are the fundamental key learnings, key things, key concepts that you have to get your head around if you want to grow a business sustainably, because I think that's an important point as well. You don't grow at any cost. And yeah, so that's what we do, is we work with industry experts who've started, grown and sold companies to help share the knowledge and I guess all of the scars and war wounds that we've had over the years to help other people fast track their journey for growth.
Hence this Growth Trust podcast, to give these insights, which brings us to you, Alison. Your involvement with the centre over time, I'd be interested to hear about that. But you co-founded a company, PUMPSEAL Australia. Tell us about how you started this company. What was it all about?
So my background is in accounting, so I'm a CPA. Whilst I was getting my degree, my husband, and I worked together in a company, which we later on went on to buy and took over as pretty much a startup again, because it had almost fallen apart. So we operated in the mining services area, provided engineering maintenance products, basically pumps and sealing devices. So yeah, we ran that for 20 years and sold it in January, just prior to COVID hitting.
So you were saying, though, you took it over because it had some problems, obviously, and needed some fixing. Tell us about the process by which you got it up and running and then eventually got it to a point where it was saleable.
Okay, well, we took it over in January 2020, and at the time it was down to just, I think we took 4 staff with us. We had another business partner with us who'd also been involved in the business. So between our skill set, we were able to build the sales team and then gradually add on a service division, take on new products as well, build our expertise. So working in the mining services industry in WA is not a bad place to be, especially through the GFC. But we hit some rough weather when the iron ore price dropped in about 2013, and we really had to go and take a hard look at our business and restructure the way that we did things. So it was at that point we decided that my husband, who was the managing director, needed to step back and actually refocus our sales team. And I stepped into the role of general manager. So it wasn't something that I particularly wanted to do. At the time, I certainly hadn't even thought about doing it, but we actually just realised that this is what the business needed. And so when we regained that focus, we found that it was able to really take off. And then we went through the business growth program, but our goal in doing that, we had a very clear end game, which was to set our business up so that we could sell it at some point.
So tell us about the involvement with the business growth program, because as the name suggests, this is the Growth Trust podcast in which we look at the service that the centre can offer. How did it assist you?
Oh, look, we got selected for the program by the ANZ Bank, which we're really grateful for because it was just an incredible experience. We were already well positioned for growth and on a growth trajectory, but it really gave us focus for what we were doing. It made us put a business plan into place. It made us actually execute and implement on that business plan. It held us accountable to that. But also in attending the program as an executive team, what we found was when we came back to the office, we didn't have to try and tell everyone else what we'd learned and what we were trying to do. We came back to the office all on the same page and ready to hit the ground running. And we were all really fired up and motivated for what we needed to do and what we wanted to accomplish. So for us, it was a tremendous experience, plus not to mention the fact that you're around other businesses going through similar issues and similar problems. And so you're learning from other people that you're not an island. It's not just you that's going through this stuff. Most businesses of your size are going through the same sort of issues that you are.
It's interesting you mentioned that, they gave you advice about establishing a business plan and sticking to it. So did you initially start with an abundance of enthusiasm, knowing the industry, but not really having a very specific plan. And it was great to have someone impose some oversight, some structure, if you like.
Yeah, absolutely. For us, we were for so many years just happy to grow, year on year, 10% growth. We were happy with that. And at some point, we actually came to the realization, well, what if we planned for 20% growth? What if we actually thought about, instead of saying this is what we've got, this is what we think we can do with it, what if we were to say, this is where we'd like to be, what do we need to implement to make that happen? And that change in mindset was huge for us.
So what sort of advice did they offer? Did they give you the encouragement to think about 20% growth or more that you hadn't previously considered?
I think what they do is they provide you with a skill set. So you come away armed with knowledge, and it then gives you the confidence to be able to take risks. One of the things that I see when I work with businesses is that startups, it's risky starting a business. But generally people have a product, they have a passion, they know what they're doing. Once you've been in business for 5, 10, 15 years and you've been successful, you've got a lot more to lose. And so what you find is the appetite for risk starts to drop. But if you actually learn the skills that you need, and that framework that we've provided really helps with that, it gives you the confidence in your own ability and in the organisation's ability to actually stretch and to grow more.
So to you, Ryan, obviously that's fundamental to the centre's aims, to give a helping hand and oversight in some way. Do you find that people, when they get into establishing their own startup business, they have this overwhelming abundance of enthusiasm, but they just don't have the basic skills, the basic business tenets in place to grow their business in a way that isn't frightening?
Ron, I think what happens in startup, oftentimes folks will have a product or a service idea, and as we would talk about in the program, you're kind of everything in that situation. Mm-hmm. You're the chief product officer, you're the finance person, you're the sales person, you're the customer service person, you manage the invoicing, the logistics and supply chain. You do everything because it might only be yourself or a handful of people around the table. As that organization gets larger, and I think to Alison's point, what we notice, some of that risk appetite or dial that gets a little funky is, as you now have more mouths to feed and more people that are dependent on the success of the organization, so you start to become a little more cautious, perhaps. Mm-hmm. I see a lot where leaders, CEOs, MDs, owners of smaller operations battle to get out of their own way. So they like being in control. They're a little in love with being needed. Mm-hmm. And having the queue of people out the door who want to ask them all the questions. They're the decision maker, and they're the bottleneck in many cases. So one of the things that we try and do is help people understand, if you're going to grow the organization sustainably, when you get to about 15 or 20 FTEs, you're going to have to get out of your own way.
Yeah.
When you employ that level of staff, at some point you have to be in control enough to let go. The emotional journey that the leader goes through, or that leadership team goes through, to learn how to delegate, to learn how to trust people, to learn how to create an environment where a broader team can implement their vision without them being across everything all of the time. That's one of the central functions of kind of driving growth in a business.
That must be hard for a lot of people who establish their own business, because I would imagine by its very nature, they are control freaks in some respect. They've started this baby. They want to make sure that they're running it and that it doesn't get away from them. And there may be a distrust occasionally of others.
Yep.
So how do you instill that leap of faith? Or maybe to you, Alison, I noticed you talked about your husband and yourself changing roles. So obviously you had to start looking at the company in a different way. And at some point you had to handball some responsibilities to other people. How did you manage that?
Look, it wasn't easy at first. I think that we started to bring people around us who had expertise in areas that we didn't. And that's when we look at how you grow a business and the stages of business growth, is that the company requires different things of you as a leader at different stages. So as Ryan said, to start off, you're doing everything, but then you start to bring people in because you can't. And so you've got to let go of the things you're not good at. And one of the hardest things is actually letting go of the things you are good at and bringing in other people who can do those things. So I think what we try to do is to work with those teams to show them how getting out of the way and allowing those things can happen can benefit everyone. And oftentimes leaders stay there because that's a safe space for them, because that's what they know. And so it's making that transition from being someone who runs a business to actually becoming a business person and putting the business first. And then that means learning some new skills, because you're moving into a role as a leader that's entirely different to the role that you've been in all along. And letting go is hard. So, but you've got to see the benefits far outweigh the difficulties that you go through.
So what were the new skills that you learnt courtesy of the centre and the courses, the thing that you did?
Well, number one, I learned to plan, which was really good. We had vague plans before, but we really put some key plans into place for staffing. We actually built a picture about what we wanted the organisation to look at. We actually put together an organisation chart for what we wanted the business to look like once we grew to a certain size. What else did I learn? I learned to look after myself a bit more.
Yeah.
I learned to actually preempt the things that happen around externalities, and that avoiding those things doesn't actually help your business. So thinking about what would we do if this happened, if managing exchange rate risk, looking at all those sorts of things. We also looked at what it takes to build a great organisation. So we implemented ways of communicating with our staff that we took our entire team along for the ride with us, which meant keeping them up to date on a monthly basis. And what we found was that generated some momentum. When people felt like they were a part of something, then they gave their best. And we found that had a bit of a snowball effect, that the success then came because our staff were so engaged.
It's interesting.
And celebrating success was huge too.
Yeah, well, you certainly had some successes. You co-founded PUMPSEAL Australia, a specialist supplier of process pumps, pumping systems, sealing solutions. After 16 years as CFO, you took on the role of general manager, and under your leadership, revenues doubled in just 3 years. That sort of level of growth, was that a bit scary?
Oh no, it was exciting at the time. It can be scary though. You do have to manage growth well. We had a key strategy for profitable revenue growth. We had 3 pillars: profitable revenue growth, empowering our leaders, and celebrating successes. And so we made that key to what we were doing. But we made sure we were doing the hard work behind the scenes too, putting the systems and processes into place. And we made mistakes along the way. We had a workshop automation system that went pear-shaped, and we had to pull the pin on it and start again. So it wasn't easy. But it's a lot more fun when you're actually kicking goals and when you can say to your team, we've had another record month, congratulations, we're bringing in donuts for everyone today to celebrate. It's a lot more fun to grow than to not.
So your skills base must have changed dramatically over time, because, you mentioned, you were trained as an accountant, but then later on, communication becomes pivotal. You talk about working out ways to keep the staff on the same page, to encourage them, to set goals, to know that they've reached them. So all of that, did the Centre for Business Growth also assist with those sorts of things as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I think as a leader, realising you have to change and then giving you the skills to do that is really critical. Taking your team along with you as well, it gives you a context to have some hard conversations and some difficult conversations that perhaps need to be had. And particularly as Australians, oftentimes we try to avoid having those conversations. We like to sit around the table and have a great time and be what we would say friends with each other, but sometimes we don't have those honest conversations that we need to have. But when you don't have those honest conversations, you actually don't build trust in the team. And so it's really important to go there and to address those things.
So here on the Growth Trust podcast, Ryan, having listened to that, your extensive experience in business, what have you noted in terms of the skills that you need to impart to people who run their own business when they grow exponentially? How do you instill some discipline in them so that they stick to plans and they have a plan?
I think it starts with having a really clear picture of why you're in business. Mm-hmm. What is it that you do? What's your purpose to exist? What's your mission statement?
Do you think people can get lost sometimes? They forget, they just get overwhelmed by the process?
And you get distracted by the new shiny twinkly thing and the next exciting thing that's coming over the pike, or you get a flattering engagement with the client that maybe is a good ego boost, and when the dust settles, you look at it and go, gee, that wasn't very profitable for us. It was hard on the staff, or it didn't make enough money, or whatever the case might be. So
it seemed like a good idea at the time.
You need a framework to allow you to prioritize. So the other end of that prioritization piece, if you're clear about why you're in business, the other piece is being clear about where you're going. Yeah. And Alison spoke about designing the org chart for, a future state of the company. And what's the famous Yogi Berra quote around, if you don't know where you're going, any road will get you there. So I think that kind of key process of helping somebody understand, if you want to grow a business sustainably, you've got to put a marker in the sand. Now, life happens and things might change, or there might be external factors that change, and you might need to course correct along the way. But if you're just aimlessly moving forward, you're unable to harness the resource that's at your disposal, both your financial resource in the business or external parties, as well as the talent that lives in your business, to point that talent in a particular direction to accomplish a set of goals. So that's probably the foundation. The second part, I think, is the trust element, and Alison referenced that as well. Yeah, I had somebody ask me a couple of weeks back at a local business chamber function, how do you learn to trust your team? I speak about that, being in control enough to let go. How do you get to that state as a leader? And I said, if people are clear on where they're headed, and they can feel a part of the mission and the purpose of the organization, so they're comfortable with why they're doing this, where they're going, and critically that you build a set of shared values. You as the leader can walk away with confidence, knowing that they're heading in the same direction you are, because you've articulated quite clearly what success looks like. And vision should be really practical and grounded, not kind of vague, nebulous statements. It should be, you can close your eyes and say, in 3 years' time, we've got these customers, we're operating in these markets, we're employing this many people, so a real clear picture of where you're going. So you know that the team is headed in the same direction. And then critically, building that culture and values piece gives you a sense of confidence that the how that they're going to get there, that the how of how they're going to do that, is coming from the same operating principles that you would.
Yeah.
So as a leader, if I know that somebody's headed in the same direction, and I know that they're going to do that in a principled way that is consistent with how I'd think about it, or we as an executive team would think about it as leaders in the organization, that builds trust in folks to let them run. Alison spoke about having hard conversations. One of the critical roles of a leader as the business grows is to call out those folks who are not doing things that are values aligned, that are not pointed in the right direction, that are not aiming for the same goals, because that can be quite destructive in the organization. The other folks will sit around and go, why does Mike or why does Sally get away with that sort of behavior when we're all held to her? And you get that sort of slow creeping problem in the business. As a leader, you've always got to be on it to maintain that team dynamic, be a lighthouse for the kind of values in the organizations you want to run. So capacitating people, that core bit about building trust, relates to both having clear direction as well as, I think, having a really clear values framework.
I was interested, I noted that you were CEO of Unlimited in South Africa. That company helped many other South African companies during their startup phase and assisted them in managing growth. You were also CEO of a company called
Ster-Kinekor, yeah.
Theatres, where you and your team delivered 150% growth in profit. Again, I'm always intrigued about, people who start up a business and then it really takes off. How do you make sure that level of growth is sustainable, that, there won't be boom and bust?
Yeah, I guess the cinema industry is a fascinating sector. That company had a couple of thousand staff, maybe 1,800 staff, something like that, doing, at the time, well north of $1 billion at the top line. Mm-hmm. And the movie industry, what's fascinating about the movie industry is that your product shelf, what you sell, changes every Friday. So that's problem one. Mm-hmm. Problem two is you have no control of that product. It's somebody else's. And so the quality or the audience attraction or whatever is going to arrive this coming Friday, I don't want to say is a guess, because you'd have some sense, but there is a high degree of uncertainty. And I think that's a key thing about risk, right, is that we tend to view risk as having negative connotations, and I don't think that's true. I think risk just means uncertainty. And so if you learn how to mitigate for that you can kind of move forward with confidence. So in a theatres business, a shelf that changes every Friday, the realization for our team when I walked in there was, actually, this is a Coke and popcorn business. We sell entertainment experiences. And why should somebody choose to come here rather than, hop onto a streaming service or something like that? It's because the experience is fundamentally different. Key to driving successful growth in a company is working out what your differentiation is. Why do you exist?
Yeah.
Cinemas exist because they provide a great communal entertainment experience that you can't replicate anywhere else. In a sports stadium or a live concert, those sorts of things. But you can't replicate a movie-going experience that has that same breadth. Other people are chuckling around you when there's a good gag on screen, and that makes you kind of enjoy the film more.
So it's constantly knowing what it is that you're selling. Why you got in this business in the first place, and how you should grow that experience and know what it is consistently. I'm interested also, Alison, as part of the centre's work, you provide advice as a growth expert to others now. Tell us about that role and how you draw upon your experience with PUMPSEAL Australia.
Well, I think one of the things that actually sets the program apart from the Centre for Business Growth is that we're not academics. If you're called a growth expert, it's because you've actually started, grown and exited a business. So you've been through it all yourself. And so now I get to help deliver the Centre's program to other CEOs and executive teams of SMEs all around the country, and just launching into WA at the moment, which we're really excited about. And I get to help them through their journey of growth. And for me, it's come full circle, which has just been wonderful, having been through the program. Yeah, it's just great for me to work through and help I see CEOs in exactly the same position I was, and I see them have those little aha moments. And that actually is where I get my passion. That's what drives me, what I do. And also look at some of the companies who've been through our program. And there are some big organisations, and oftentimes I can sort of fall in that category of looking at myself and thinking, well, our business wasn't quite that big, I'm not that impressive. But equally, I can speak to those other companies who aren't that big and who were wanting and who are aspiring to be bigger, and perhaps not be quite as intimidating as someone who's grown their company to 200 million, who you feel like they don't kind of get where you're at. So I love that side of it.
Can you pass on an aha moment, as you refer to it, in your business career, where there was a light bulb moment, and it's one of those key things that you pass on now to entrepreneurs who take part in the courses that are offered?
Yeah, I think probably what I mentioned earlier about, rather than just working out what we've got and where we can get to next year, I talked about changing that mindset to saying, well, where do we want to be next year? And what do we need to invest now to make that happen? And actually seeing a true investment for what it is, as opposed to just seeing expenses and money going out the door. Because I think when you're in small business, sometimes it feels like you're just spending your money on everything, and you see a lot of things as costs. So actually learning the true value of an investment and knowing why you're doing what you're doing, because you've got a greater goal that you're trying to accomplish, makes that a lot easier to do.
So a final question to you both. Knowing what you know now, what would you have done differently when starting out your respective business careers? Firstly to you, Alison.
I wish I'd have realised that I could actually plan to grow. I look back now, so many of the experiences I've been through I wouldn't change. They were difficult. And if you told me at the start the things I'd have to deal with, I would never have believed I was capable of doing it. So there's been that lovely growth journey because I've had to tackle those things. But I look back now and my one regret is thinking how much I left on the table for those 16 years before we actually reached that point, and realise what we left behind, where we could have been and what we could have done if we'd have realised that earlier.
How about you, Ryan? Over your business career, is there something that stands out that, I wish I'd known this when I started?
There are so many things, Ron. I mean, off the top of my head, the day I realised, so, I guess early on, the hubris of youth, first company I ran, I was firmly of the view that there are only two ways to do anything, the wrong way and my way. And the day I disavowed myself of that notion and understood that my goal as a leader, my power, comes from making other people powerful, from empowering other people, and that if I have enough belief and I've built the right team around me, they will do incredible things. And it took me a long time, I guess, to recognize that it's not my own agency that makes those things happen. It is the effect of the other people around me. And that my role really is about how I tee them up for success. That's been transformative.
One final question. As part of this Growth Trust podcast, we'll be examining a whole lot of issues related to small businesses. And I wanted to get a sense from you about some of because there'll be people watching this today, listening to this today, will be thinking, what's coming up in future.
Yeah.
Give us a pitch into the future about some of the other issues that we'll be exploring.
Yeah, I think Alison touched earlier. We're going to be chatting a bit about how you manage yourself as a leader, because your own well-being is important. Growing a business is hard. Running a business is hard. There are days that things don't go the way you plan out. So we'll be chatting about how do you manage yourself through that piece? How do you be the leader that the organization and your people need you to be? We'll be having a chat around stuff related to artificial intelligence and particularly in the SME landscape, how you might use AI in your business and what are some of the low-hanging fruits. There's huge productivity benefits coming down the pike in this space, and we're just scratching the surface of what that might be. And then we'll have a chat about sustainable growth, sort of woven through many of these podcasts, and what does that mean? Why should you grow? Why should a business be larger? What's the aim of that? Which unpack some of that a little bit as well. And understanding, I guess, why it's important in our economy that we have businesses that not only start up, but also that grow up and then stay up. So we'll be chatting a bit about some of those things as well.
So plenty of things to discuss in the weeks ahead. But firstly, Alison, thank you so much for being our first guest in the inaugural Growth Trust podcast. Thanks for your insights. And thank you very much for your time as well, Ryan Williams. Thank you.
Thanks, Ron.
Thanks for your company today. If you'd like more information about the issues raised in this podcast or other related topics, please visit our website at www.centreforbusinessgrowth.com. And a quick reminder that you can always tune in to the Growth Trust podcast on Spotify, Google, Apple or YouTube. Bye for now.